Oh, my heavens.
Actress Edie Falco is the latest celebrity to be surprised by her family's history on the NBC show, Who Do You Think You Are?
Oh, you're kidding.
Wowee.
Now, it's Chuck's turn to go on a journey of self-discovery.
Can you read that?
Oh, wow.
You think you know your family's history, you hear all the stories as a child, you pass them on to your own kids, of course.
Yeah, but Chuck joins us now, and you say, I guess experts found a few surprises in your family tree you didn't know about.
Well, you know, they did, and I thought I was going to find out, things that I already knew. But there were some things lurking that I had no idea about. I had no idea what I was going to find out about, and that was with the help then of Anastasia Harmon. She's a historian with Ancestry.com. She came to my rescue. Let me tell you, what better place to uncover secrets in your family's history than the Henry Ford in Dearborn.
What do you know about your dad's side of the tree?
Well, I know that my grandfather and my grandmother came to this country via Ellis Island, I'm assuming.
She also reminded me about a cross-continental love story involving my great-grandmother, Rose.
She had two guys who really liked her, and she married one of them. And then he died a few years later, and the other guy was still there, Charles Raffle. He was also in Chicago, and the story I know, remarried Charles Raffle, and then even though my grandmother was not adopted as a Raffle, that's really the guy she knew as her father.
Well, we have a couple documents to show you about your family.
Oh, okay.
This is your family tree on Ancestry.com. Rose is your great-grandmother, so she's the woman in the love story.
Right.
This is the 1920s. This is an interesting family because we have Charles, he's the head, and Rosie, who's the wife. And then we have these three children with the last name Schaefer. So we have Hilda, your grandmother,
right,
who's a daughter, and she's 17.
My family came from Bohemia and Moravia, which are now part of the Czech Republic. There was a family story about my great-grandmother Rose traveling across the Atlantic on the same boat with two suitors. Was it true?
This column asks, what year did you immigrate to the United States? And can you see what Charles says right here?
1904 for Charles Raffle, and 1906 for Rose Raffle. So they didn't come together.
My hometown is Chicago, and Anastasia revealed a clue as to why my family chose to land in the Windy City.
They would have learned some manufacturing kind of trades in Moravia.
Okay.
Right here is their address.
That's where I grew up. My entire family grew up on Bernard Street.
So you have 3 generations of your family living on Bernard Street?
Yeah.
Well, I need to tell you it's actually 4 generations of your family living on Bernard Street.
Wow.
But this Reski family right here, number 66, they're living in the same house. And so we have Mary Reski, and it turns out that Mary is Rosie's mother.
Oh.
So this is your great-great-grandmother. What I think we should do next is try to learn more about Mary and see what we can find out about your second great-grandmother. This is the 1910 census. She's a widow. She's 55.
I discovered this part of my family had what's called a chain migration, where one family member came over first and saved enough money for my great-grandmother Mary and her other children to come over next. And I have found that my own family has done something similar in Metro Detroit.
If we fast forward in time, I moved to this town in 1982, and in the course of the next 5 to 10 years, my brother, sister, mom, and dad immigrate from Chicago to Detroit.
So we're going to talk about your family's first steps in America. One of the things that I think you might be surprised at is where they landed. Can you read this? This is the port where they landed in the United States.
Ellis Island? No. That's not Chicago. No. I can't tell.
It's Baltimore.
Baltimore.
Baltimore would have been a choice for them because it would have actually been easier than coming through Ellis Island. The experience going through Ellis Island was a daunting experience.
What I've learned from you is that we who want to learn more about the history of our families have these grand assumptions. I never knew that you could come through Baltimore. And the rest of the story for me is that somehow in my life, a family of people who worked with their hands, machinists and factory workers and assemblers, that I wind up in Motown. I wind up sketching cars and loving cars, and that's where my family came from, steel mills in what is now the Czech Republic. Now, you may have noticed as we talked about the name Ratsky, actually it was Hradsky, but when the census takers would come, they would fill it out differently. This name you are now seeing was the Gaidica name when my family came to this country. It's pronounced Gaidica. And then 1918, my grandfather, Fred, in his World War I registration, he was listed as Fred Gaidica. 13 years later, with his naturalization papers, the name became Gaidica. And not that that made it a lot easier, it's just that everybody here knows it, but you leave town and they may not. So a lot of aha moments here. The thread that runs through my family, working people. My mom and dad were factory laborers, so were a lot of my aunts and uncles, grandfather. That's interesting. The migration thing about how we moved, we all lived one above the other. My neighborhood in Chicago, that house you saw, was a lot like Hamtramck. Two-story.
Feels like a classic Chicago story, too.
Frame buildings. And then the other thing is that these names that changed, and they were anglicized. I thought it happened in Ireland with a guy with a stamp who said, oh, change it. You know, you're Smith now. No, Anastasia said that's not the way it happened, and sure enough, I found out my grandfather changed it. And one other funny note, looking back at the 1920 census, under Gaidica's name, 2 doors down is a Smilovitz. I'm not kidding.
How about
I looked at this and I thought, did Bernie get in and mess with my forms? It's not spelled exactly the same, but he said it doesn't look like it's family. But I had Smilovitz neighbors when, you know, it was going back in the early 1900s.
Pretty darn fun.
Very cool.
It really is magic what Anastasia and people like her can draw from these documents. If you want to hear more about Chuck's family, by the way, we've put the full conversation that he had with our historian there on the family page of clickondetroit.com.
Very cool. And remember, the NBC show Who Do You Think You Are airs Friday nights at 8 right here on Local 4.
All right, a quick look at what we're working on for tomorrow.